Let's talk about the 2025 Nova Scotia housing market because it really told a fascinating story. It wasn't about those crazy explosive price jumps or, on the flip side, any dramatic crashes. Nope. It was a story about transition. It was about a market kind of shifting gears, finding a new rhythm, a more sustainable one that really changed the whole game for both buyers and sellers. The single best word to describe the year is right here on the screen: evolution. This wasn't some sudden overnight change. It was a slow, steady shift. The market moved away from that frantic, honestly unpredictable pace we'd seen before and just settled. It settled into something more measured, something you could actually plan around. So what does that evolution look like as a single number? Well, it's this: 6.9%. That was the average price gain for a home in Nova Scotia for the entire year. So, yeah, despite all the chatter about a cooling market, homeowners still saw some really solid growth. So how we get there? All right, let's pop the hood and take a look. To really get the story of 2025, we've got to take the province's pulse first. We're going to look at the three vital signs of this market. How much homes were selling for, just how many were selling, and how fast it was all happening. Okay, let's start with the year's most intense moment. The absolute high-water mark for the market. Right in the middle of summer, everything peaked. The average price hit nearly $500,000. We saw almost 1,400 homes sell in a single month. And get this, properties were basically gone in just 39 days. That was the absolute fever pitch of the action. Let's actually trace that price journey across the year. We kick things off in January at around $441,000. Then came that steady climb through the spring, hitting that peak of $493,000 in the summer. But what's interesting is what happened next. It wasn't a crash, not at all. It was more of a gentle correction, with prices settling really comfortably by December at over $471,000, still way above where the year began. And the story of how many homes sold, well, that's even more dramatic. Just look at the difference here. We went from this winter valley in February with just over 500 homes sold to a summer peak in July, or that number more than doubled to almost 1,400. It just goes to show you how incredibly concentrated that peak buying season really was. So what did all this actually mean for buyers? Well, it meant a huge difference in pressure. In the summer, you basically had 39 days to make one of the biggest decisions of your life. By winter, that stretched out to 56. But the biggest change? The room to negotiate. We saw the sale-to-list ratio, that's the final sale price compared to the asking price, dip from 97.4% down to 96.3%. Now, that might sound tiny, but on a typical home, that's thousands of dollars in potential savings. It was a real, tangible shift in leverage back towards the buyer. All this data really points to one thing: a tale of two seasons. The 2025 market had two completely distinct personalities. You had the intense, super fast-paced summer peak, and then you had the calmer, more deliberate winter valley. And understanding that split was absolutely key to navigating the year. And if you want to see that difference in raw economic terms, just look at the total dollar volume, which is basically the market's economic heartbeat. In July, an incredible $683 million worth of real estate changed hands. By December, that pulse had slowed way down to about $338 million. That is a staggering difference that just shows how much activity was jammed into those summer months. Okay, so we've seen the big 30,000-foot view, but a provincial trend? That's just an average. The real story of Nova Scotia real estate is always, always local. So let's take a quick tour around the province and see how these trends played out very differently depending on where you were. We'll start at the higher end of the price spectrum. And no surprise here, Halifax-Dartmouth is leading the pack as the urban hub, with prices pushing past $600,000. But check out the South Shore. That really wide price range just reflects the premium people are willing to pay for those beautiful coastal properties. And of course, the Annapolis Valley shows its strong appeal, with prices holding steady right around that $400,000 mark. Now let's flip over to the value-focused regions. Cape Breton clearly stands out as the province's value island, right? Average prices stayed below $300,000, the most affordable entry point you could find. Meanwhile, places like the northern and highland regions, they offered that sweet spot of affordability and lifestyle, which is exactly why they attracted such steady demand all year long. Okay, we've crunched the numbers, we've toured the province, so what does all of this actually mean for you? Let's boil everything down into a practical playbook with the key takeaways for anyone who is trying to navigate this market. Here's the core of the whole story, right here, in a nutshell. For buyers, this new, evolved market delivered some much-needed breathing room, a little bit of negotiating power, and the very welcome return of conditional offers. But for sellers, the game completely changed. Success now required smart timing, realistic pricing, and a healthy dose of patience, especially if you weren't selling in that peak summer window. So for a buyer, the path to success had three pretty clear steps. First, you had to look at those shoulder seasons, fall and winter, for way less competition. Second, you had to understand that a good house priced right would still sell in a flash, so you couldn't just sit on your hands. And third, you had to make a strong, reasonable offer. The data shows that even in a cooling market, sellers knew what their homes were worth, and trying to lowball them just wasn't a winning strategy. And for sellers, the winning formula was just as clear. The number one most important rule: price it right from the very start. Overpricing was the fastest way to have your house just sit there. Beyond that, it was all about knowing your local market's timing, making sure your home had maximum curb appeal for that spring season, and being ready to negotiate. The days of take it or leave it were pretty much over. So after a full year of this evolution, what's the big takeaway? Well, the trends we saw in 2025, they weren't just some temporary blip. They've really set the stage for what Nova Scotia's housing market is going to look like heading into 2026 and probably beyond. The biggest takeaway is this: the market has matured. It's moved away from that chaotic, explosive growth of the past and is now settling into a more sustainable, more balanced pattern. And this new landscape, it creates a more neutral territory, one that serves both buyers and sellers in a much, much healthier way. Which leaves us with this final thought. In this new, more balanced market, who truly has the upper hand? Is it the buyer, who can now afford to be patient and wait for just the right opportunity? Or is it the seller, who's done their homework, priced their home perfectly, and is totally prepared for this new reality? It's a question that's really going to define the market moving forward.